Arguably the biggest true crime news story of 2018 was the arrest of Joseph James DeAngelo, who was identified by authorities as the infamous Golden State Killer. Authorities in California have charged him with 8 counts of murder and 13 kidnappings to commit robbery in place of rape charges, as the statute of limitations on such crimes has expired. These charges represent only a small fraction of the violent crimes the Golden State Killer is believed to have committed between 1974 and 1986. DeAngelo has not yet gone to trial or been convicted of any of these charges. The apprehension of such a prolific criminal was obviously a major cause for celebration, but part of the notoriety of DeAngelo's arrest comes from the method used to identify him. DeAngelo was arrested after being identified through forensic genealogy, in the first public case of this technique being used. A sample from a Golden State Killer crime scene had been uploaded to a relatively unknown genetic genealogy website and had identified a distant relative of the contributor of the DNA. Through creating extensive family trees, genealogists were able to identify suspects who would theoretically share that same percentage of DNA with the individual found in the database. They were able to collect DeAngelo's DNA based on that information, first covertly and then in a controlled setting, and tested it to confirm that it matches the sample found at the crime scene. The website these authorities used is known as GEDMatch, and as of the making of this video, it has been used to make arrests in 15 murders and sexual assaults. Several of these arrests were made in very high-profile cold cases, including those of April Tinsley, Michaela Welsh, Jay Cook, and Tanya Van Kuylenberg. It has also been used to identify the remains of 6 John and Jane Does. While the use of genetic genealogy to solve crimes is still a novel approach, GEDMatch itself has been around for almost a decade and has very humble and personal origins. Curtis Rogers was a businessman who had a lifelong interest in his family history. He began studying genealogy in earnest and had his DNA tested with a desire to verify his family's belief that they were related to Thomas Rogers, a passenger on the Mayflower in 1620. Through Curtis's research, he learned that they were not. However, this did not diminish his interest in genealogy and the role genetic research could play in it. He became an administrator for the Rogers Surname Project on Family Tree DNA, the commercial service he had used to obtain his DNA sequence. His experience on Family Tree DNA made Curtis wonder if it would be possible to create a computer program to quickly do the work of constructing elaborate family trees that was at the time still so cumbersome, even with the aid of DNA. Another member of the Rogers Surname Project recommended that Curtis speak to a man named John Olson. Olson was a transportation engineer who, while he had no real interest in genealogy, was fascinated by the idea of using computer code to mathematically compare and map DNA sequences. Despite living 1,000 miles apart, John and Curtis worked together to develop the program specifically for the Rogers Surname Project. In 2010, they decided to open up the project to anyone with an interest in genetic genealogy, and GEDMatch was born. The name GEDMatch is a reference to GEDCOM files, which were developed by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to organize genealogical data in a single plaintext file. Due to their specific beliefs about family and the afterlife, Latter-day Saints have a particular interest in identifying their extended relatives. They therefore have played a major part in developing databases and techniques used in genealogical research. While GEDMatch is in no way affiliated with the church, it has benefited from and still uses some of their research, including GEDCOM files. The actual GEDMatch site is fairly basic. Since the site is an open-source research tool, not a for-profit venture, the 2-man crew running it is more concerned with keeping up its technical accuracy than making it look flashy. Until the site's recent notoriety, it was basically a hobby project for Olson and Rogers, even after Rogers retired from working full-time. While the site was created to be a public resource and never intended to make Rogers and Olson a lot of money, it still does have financial concerns. The cost of the servers needed to run a site with so much data uploaded to it has been estimated to be close to $250,000 a year. To cover these costs, GEDMatch offers what they call a Tier 1 membership. For $10 a month, Tier 1 members gain access to extra, more specialized tools. This keeps the more general tools and search features that the average person would need free to use. This background and research is what makes GEDMatch both unique and accessible to law enforcement. For individuals who are doing their own genetic research, the site gives them a chance to find family matches amongst customers of different commercial DNA sites. For example, if someone chooses to use an Ancestry.com test kit, they will only see familial matches from people who have also used Ancestry.com. However, once they upload their raw data to GEDMatch, they have the potential to find relatives who chose to use sites like 23andMe or Family Tree DNA. Since the site is open source and individuals who upload data to it are voluntarily allowing it to be compared to other samples, this also means that law enforcement can utilize it to find genetic relatives of individuals who have left DNA at crime scenes. The companies that actually provide the DNA testing, like 23andMe, do not allow such access to their data, as their customers have not consented to their DNA being used in such a way. It should be noted that despite public perception, uploading your DNA to GEDMatch does not give anyone, including law enforcement, access to it. GEDMatch analyzes similarities between samples and reports back this degree of similarity. When law enforcement runs a DNA profile through GEDMatch, they are shown a table of other samples sorted by the amount of DNA shared with that sample, and a numeric estimation of the number of generations separating the two contributors of those samples. Users began diverting from GEDMatch's intended use as a purely genealogical tool almost immediately. A popular use for genetic genealogy is helping adopted children identify their biological parents. While this is technically genetic genealogical research, it has the potential to reveal unknown or unwanted family information, and therefore has its own set of ethical concerns. The question of using the database to solve crimes is obviously much more loaded and has a far greater number of potential legal and ethical problems. This is why the relationship between GEDMatch and law enforcement has been somewhat rocky. Prior to Giangelo's arrest, the terms of service for the site were vague enough that uploading DNA for the purpose of investigating a crime did not violate them, but Curtis Rogers did not want to actively encourage such a use. In the past, he had been contacted by both Parabon Nanolabs, a forensics firm that has been involved with many of the major cases recently solved by forensic genealogy, and the DNA Doe Project, which is attempting to use DNA to identify John and Jane Does. In both cases, Rogers told them that while he could not stop them from using GEDMatch for their specific purposes, he refused to endorse it. Rogers and Olson were not made aware that GEDMatch was being used in the Golden State Killer case prior to the announcement of Giangelo's arrest. Rogers was initially upset that the site had been used in this way, and without his knowledge, but the public reaction to the news slowly changed his mind. 4 days after Giangelo's initial set of charges were announced, Rogers posted an announcement on GEDMatch, highlighting the fact that using DNA to identify criminals did not technically violate the site's terms of service, and inviting users to delete their information if they did not want it to be used in such a way. Rogers feared a massive wave of backlash following Giangelo's arrest, and was surprised when he was instead overwhelmed with positive feedback. There were of course some individuals who accused him of violating people's privacy, but the overwhelming majority of emails Rogers received about the news were congratulatory. Some individuals did choose to remove their information from the database, but that number paled in comparison to the number of new profiles that were uploaded. Immediately after the announcement of Giangelo's arrest, GEDMatch had over 5,000 new profiles uploaded to it, and broke its record for number of profiles added in a single day. It is impossible to know if this influx came because people simply had never heard of the site before and wanted to use it for their own genealogical research, or if they actively wanted their DNA to be used to help catch criminals. It does show, however, that plenty of people did not object to their data being used for such a purpose. Rogers subsequently updated the terms of service for GEDMatch in May 2018. They now specifically allow law enforcement officials to upload a DNA profile for the purpose of either identifying a criminal who committed a violent crime or identifying a deceased individual. GEDMatch considers a violent crime to be either a homicide or a sexual assault. Even if most people do not wish to have their DNA used in criminal investigations, only a relatively small number of willing participants are needed to be able to identify a huge percentage of the population. Since it is more of an obscure site with features mainly for people who have more than a passing interest in genealogy, GEDMatch has only approximately 1 million DNA files uploaded to it. This is in comparison to the estimated 5 million files on 23andMe and 10 million on Ancestry.com. All of the suspects who have been arrested using forensic genealogy have been identified using only this relatively small sample. This is not necessarily a surprising fact. According to an article published in the journal Science, over 60% of Americans of Northern European descent are currently able to be identified through their relatives with the samples already uploaded to GEDMatch. They estimate that this percentage will rise to over 90% within 3 years. This is due to how distantly two people can be related and still share a detectable amount of shared DNA. In the Golden State Killer case, for example, D'Angelo was identified through his fifth cousin, someone with whom his most recent common ancestor was one of his great-great-great-great-grandparents. Assuming every person in a family tree has 2 or 3 children, an individual in that family can expect to have 4,700 fifth cousins. Now, relatives more distant than third cousins only theoretically share a small enough amount of DNA that they are not guaranteed to have any shared DNA at all. Out of those 4,700 fifth cousins, a 2012 study has estimated that only about 700 of them would be identifiable through DNA. Even with this limitation, 1 million samples still has a very far reach into the general population. This video is purely an overview of GEDMatch and forensic genealogy. There are, of course, a wide range of ethical concerns that go along with this practice, and I have deliberately left out major issues like privacy and race, as each of these topics alone would probably require multiple videos to address them properly. However, unless a major court case strikes the practice down, forensic genealogy will probably continue to increase in prominence in the American justice system. As the response to GEDMatch itself after D'Angelo's arrest shows, transparency in the use of the site to solve crimes and make identifications is crucial. Educating the public about this practice and letting them make their own informed decisions about how they want to use their DNA is a basic but essential part of forensic genealogy. Please let me know your thoughts about the practice in the comments, and thank you for taking the time to watch this video.